Welcome, everyone. We're mostly ourselves over here. So I'm not even going to the formalities and giving a very long introduction. I'm saving time because I know Dr. Yang Jeju. He's from the Asian Research Institute, and his research is on trans-Himalayan relations, one aspect of which is China-Nepal. But unlike the usual political and hardcore international relations kind of stuff, Jeju works more on ethnographic and historical stuff. And if you look at Nepal-China relations, unlike some of the understandings that this relationship between the two countries have been going in a very deeper manner now, actually this relationship between the two countries dates back almost maybe 1,500 years or more. So it's centuries old. So Dr. Yang Jeju, he has a very rich presentation lined up for us. So I'm not going to take much of the time. I'm going to save all the time for Jeju. Perhaps you can go for 35, 40 minutes of presentation, and then we will go on with Q&A for that. Over to you.
Thank you, Pushpadai. Thank you for your wonderful introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. It's my great honor to be here today at ISAS to share my research on China-Nepal relations. Oh, I need to, yeah, you can maybe share the slides. Share that. It's good? Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you again, and hello again, guys. And thank you for having me here, and thank you for the staff colleague here organizing this wonderful event, and especially my thanks to the staff who designed this wonderful and very themed poster for this event. I was surprised because you may have seen the poster, and there were 4 ladies in there, and 3 of Chinese minorities and 1 from Nepal. And if I'm not mistaken, I think one of the lady in black in the middle, she's from the same ethnic minority as me. So I was very surprised to see that. I think it's a very happy coincidence. And again, thanks for everyone for joining us today here, especially we have a very big rain outside. A little bit introduce about myself. I am a postdoc fellow from Asian Research Institute, and I started doing Nepali studies at SOAS University of London, and since 2015, and with a Chinese government scholarship to learn Nepali languages in London, and because they believe I had learned Hindi in China for 4 years. So from their perspective, very centralized, and Hindi and Nepali basically, so it's very similar, and so they think I can more quickly handle languages. So anyway, I was in London, and so you can see, and my trajectory is sort of like a part of the BRI big project. So you may correctly argue that I am an agent of BRI, Chinese BRI expansion in the Himalayas. So anyway, doing Nepal-China studies is sort of like at the very beginning, it's like a convenience for me, and I do not intend to reconfirm this kind of asymmetrical global academic labor distribution, like non-Western scholars can only do some researches, has something to do with his or her own background. But it's sort of at the first beginning, it's convenient for me. And after years of considerations about why China and Nepal, and after years that I have to show people, justify my research direction to people, why did you do China and Nepal studies? I think I have a more critical angles to these things. Why China and Nepal, right? And how to do China and Nepal research. I will just put. Oh yeah, I will just put forward my conclusive thinking here about why China and Nepal, because I'm afraid I may not reach it at the end within the time limit. So I will just put it here beforehand. So I will suggest that now we imagine larger contemporary and spatial nexus of big Asia, such as Trans-Himalaya, Asia, South Asia, Indian Ocean in the Third World, South-South, Global South, and of course the latest BRI. By engaging in critical conversation with these bigger and connected worlds, starting the China-Nepal connectedness can contribute to the production of middle-range theories that well balance this kind of framework of connectedness, as well as this kind of locally, historically grounded trajectories and dynamics. That's why I think doing studies about China-Nepal relations is theoretically significant. Of course, it applies to any area studies like China, India, and China, Pakistan, and Nepal, India, Nepal, Pakistan. It applies to any. I think we need this kind of comparative and analytical units for a better production of theories as in the Asian academic communities. So how can we unpack these suggestions that I just made? Today, I will lead you go through the history between Nepal and China rather than taking history between Nepal and China as factual accounts. I wonder how the histories and other forms of knowledge are made and articulated in different contexts. So it's not a history itself, it's the histories of history and how these histories are remade to talk to contemporary and the future dynamics between Nepal and China. So here, I would like to show you a picture which I took in 2019, just before the Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Nepal. And so you can see from here, it's welcome to the land of Arnigo and Brikudi. And who is Arnico and who is Prikudi? I guess my Nepali friends here who may be more familiar with these names. So basically speaking, Arnigo, he is a Nepali artist in the 13th century working in China. And Princess Prikudi is a historical figure from the 7th century who was claimed to marry to the Tibetan king Songtsen Gampo and bring Buddhism from Nepal to Tibet. Of course, appearing at this kind of geopolitical and diplomatic occasions, the name of Arnigo and the Princess Brikudi, they serve as symbols of connections, drawing on very historical sources. But I would suggest that the histories of Arnigo or Brikudi, Princess Brikudi, they are much shorter than and more and moderner than we perhaps imagine. Before we explore how this knowledge are invented and reinvented in histories, please allow me to take you through how Nepal has been imagined in China in pre-modern time. So one way to imagine the beginning of Nepal-China relations is according to the Buddhist myth. The earliest contact between Nepal and China can be arguably traced back to a prehistorical period when Bodhisattva Manjushri, coming from China, killed the demon and emptied the big lake, making the place where now is the Kathmandu Valley habitable. Then Bodhisattva Manjushri himself returned to China. It's now included in the Vanshavali. All the histories and accounts have been well translated into English completely and by Professor Axel Michels. And is it a history or is it just like a legend or myth? I think it all depends on how you define what is history and what is myth. I think the statement posted online by the Nepali government suggests that the Nepali government believes this is a history. And the first time, as far as I know, the earliest Nepal-related records that we can still access now in Chinese languages can be traced back to the 3rd century, when it appeared not as Nepal, but as a kingdom of Ling'er. The kingdom of Ling'er, which actually it refers to the current Lumbini, and the entry basically describes the birth story of Buddha himself. And also it introduced the Buddha's father, mother, and the Buddha's clan. Very interestingly, although it's a kingdom of Ling'er, but actually it's most likely it's a typo because now we know Lumbini is not a kingdom. Lumbini, Kapilavastu is a state, is a kingdom, but the Lumbini is just a garden. But why the Chinese scholars, the traditional Chinese scholars, they will make it a kingdom? Because in the traditional Chinese character, the characters for kingdom, for and for garden, yuan is very similar, especially in the traditional forms. And it also suggests that the ignorance of traditional Chinese scholars, the ignorance, they did not really know about the Buddhist stories and the Buddhist knowledges. And later, the information about the place located within the territory of modern Nepal appeared in Faxian's Foguoji, the record of Buddhist kingdoms. Faxian, because he was very unsatisfied about the imperfect status of the collection of the Buddhist books of discipline in China, believed that they should go to India and to seek the complete versions and the collection of the disciplinary rules. So Faxian, he visited the place where now is the Kabilu Vastu, and he even gave him a name, Jiawei Luo Wei, and Faxian, and you can see from the entry that for Faxian, it was very clear that Lumbini is different from Kabila Vastu. They are two different things. And then how it took another 200 years for the first time in China that the term Nepal finally appeared. It was in the 7th century that in Xuanzang's Da Tang Xi Ji, the Great Tang records of the Western regimes, that the Chinese translation of Nepal, Nibolo, appeared. According to Xuanzang, the Nepal is situated in the heart of a snowy mountains. The people there are very naturally hard, and they do not consider good faith and and absolutely no literary attainments. They are gifted with skill in arts. I think that actually very follows the current imagination of Nepali people from the Chinese perspective in popular culture. But that's another trajectory. So anyway, although Xuanzang left some records about Nepal, but for him, Nepal is different from Kabila Vastu and Lumbini because he also has another entries about Kabila Vastu and Lumbini in his book. And Xuanzang himself did not visit Nepal. He only heard the stories of the place from other guys. And for other monks of Xuanzang's time, Nepal also mentioned separately as a country located between Tibet and Tianzhu, which is currently India. For instance, in Yi Jing's Buddhist pilgrim monks of Tang Dynasty, he mentioned that many Chinese monks visit Nepal and go passing Tibet, and one even met the Princess Wenchen, the Tang princess in Tibet, and unfortunately many monks they died in Nepal. So Yi Jing he commented, Nepal is full of poison. That is why many monks died when they arrived there. So we know that Kabila Vastu, Lumbini, and the Nepal, they represent three different things for the ancient Chinese monks. While Kabila Vastu was a secret land in the Buddhist kingdom, Nepal was a remote barbarian kingdom in the snowy mountains. Drawing no resources from the Buddhist scriptures, Nepal has no such a place in the Buddhist cultural map. This map I showed here was drawn in the 13th century according to the texts of Xuanzang from the 7th century. Here you can see Nepal and the Kabila Vastu are presented together in the same image. Here, number 1 is Nepal, and the number 2 is, I make mark here, is Kabila Vastu, the birthplace of Buddha, and also Nalanda Temple, and Hujnagar. And also here the Bodh Gaya, and all these kind of secret places from the Buddhist worldview. And so So such a method called presenting different places across time, space, and even worldviews in the same map may be one of the ancient Chinese monk solutions to relieve their borderland complex. For the ancient Chinese monks, they feel very uneasy between stuck in the middle of the Buddhist worldview and the local Confucius and the Taoist worldviews. Where is China in the Buddhist world? How was the relation between China and the Buddhist kingdom? All these kind of questions have haunted them for like hundreds of years. So they invested lots of efforts to try to prove that and find their own positions in the world, in the Buddhist world that they're trying to seek. So, however, the Chinese monks' efforts to form a coherent worldview legitimate ancient China's place in the Buddhist world did not obtain much appreciation from traditional Chinese scholars. For them, they are for the traditional Chinese literati, these records are by no means not Buddhist Indophilia. They are recklessly related to miracles and extremely inadequate for investigation. And such a ignorance, one consequence of such ignorance is that although China throughout histories for thousands of years have rich information about Nepal, it had never been systematic to form a coherent knowledge about Nepal, and much more longer times later, in early 19th century, this kind of ignorance came to a point. These two pictures I showed here record the same battle of the First Tibet-Nepal War. So I will not go through the details about war here. So basically, by the end of the 18th century and early 20th century, early 19th century, there were two wars between China, Nepal, and Tibet. Nepal, the Gorkha, they invaded Tibet, and the Tibet, they asked for help from the Qing court from Beijing, and the Qing court, they sent troops to Tibet. And after two wars, the both court, we won, and a treaty was signed. And so one consequence of the two wars is like for the first time in history, Nepal was included into the Chinese tianxia system, or on the heaven, and from the Chinese perspective, as a tributary vassal. In 1789, during the brief peace break after the First Tibet-Gorkha War, the Qianlong Emperor of Qing China ordered the Qing imperial illustration of tributary peoples amended, adding the entry of Balabu headman and his servants, as shown here. Balabu here refers to Nepal, basically. So what is the illustration of tributary peoples? Basically, you can understand as a cultural map, a visual demonstration of the traditional tianxia system under the heaven system, where the foreign nationalities and ethnic groups were arranged hierarchically with China. China, of course, especially Beijing, is arranged into the center. And in this way, the kings could demonstrate the vast territory of his empire and fix each member's position in the empire's way in a way of an index. So where is Nepal's position in this cultural index? This is a translation of the entries. So it's like, okay, Balabu is also called Gorkha. Its location is also told close to Tibet, and there are 4 tribes in the land of Balabu, and just recently, Gorkha has united the land, and they worship the Buddha, and their costumes and many things introduced in this entry. And 10 years later, just after the Second War, another version of the illustration of tributary people has been amended with more information of the Balabu people amended. And the name of Balabu originates from the Tibetan word Barbu, and which did not resemble any previous names recorded in Chinese accounts at all. Even just after the war started, even the Amban in Tibet, like the central government's highest officer in Tibet, the Amban, he even had no information about the neighbor. And it is recorded that the emperor's grand chancellor He Sheng learned that a Tibetan Lama living in Tashlempu Monastery in Tibet had visited Balabu many years ago, that he visited and consulted the Lama. In addition to informing the Grand Chancellor about the Balabu's rough geographic locations, architecture, religions, products, military conflicts with neighboring countries, the Lama firstly mentioned that Golkha, the biggest, the strongest tribe had occupied Balabu. It probably was the first time in China that the name Golkha appeared in official Chinese texts, and ever since, until the early 20th century, Nepal has been known in Chinese by this name. Until in 1911, this name was being challenged by a Chinese political critics. So 1911 is a very critical year in modern Chinese history. It was the year that the Qing dynasty was overthrown by the revolutionaries and the establishment of the Republic of China. And just a few months earlier of the overthrow of the Qing dynasty, a article under the name "Discussion about Nepal" was published, and this article basically it starts the article that okay, traditionally we know Nepal as Golkha in Chinese. However, the author, he argued that Golkha is not a very accurate way to call Nepal to understand our neighbor country. We should call it, for in the British way, the English way, call it Nepal. That is the Western convention to know a international, to know another state. And why would this author make a problem of a translation of the country's translation's name? Because he just learned, he was based in the UK, in London, in Scotland, and he just learned that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China communicate with the British ambassador, saying that, okay, Nepal and Bhutan was China's vassal states. And of course, the British refuted that. And the author himself, as a Chinese overseas, he felt very humiliated about this kind of reckless behavior from the Chinese government. And then he, all throughout history, all the articles, he made all these kind of ways to prove that Nepal was not a vassal state of China. He even asked 8 questions at the late half part of this article, and he suggests that as long as one of these 8 questions can be answered, then the basis of Nepal being a vassal state of China will be empty. For instance, he asked why, since Nepal is a vassal state of China, why during the Anglo-Nepalese War from 1914 to 1916, why didn't China intervene? However, he concluded that his conclusion is very different from his attitudes throughout history. He did not try to say, okay, we should establish equal relations with Nepal. He reflects that, okay, Nepal now is not a vassal state of China because China now is very weak and itself is not very strong. And by reflecting on the case of Nepal, he urges the Chinese government to quickly modernize, to have to improve the legal and administrative systems, and to have a strong army. And then one day when China became strong again, it can reclaim the power over Nepal. So throughout from this 1909 article and until I think 1920s and 1930s, the majorities of Chinese production about Nepal more focused on using Nepal as a mirror to reflect China's own modernity issue and development issue. And all articles. And there was a potential war between China and Nepal by the end of 1929. And eventually it was solved by the diplomatic channels. And the war became the arena, all this kind of reflection and emotion, humiliation sense, and determination to modernize. All these kind of different emotions can be articulated in China. And then I think 1930 or 1931, the national government sent the then Chinese consulate in India to Nepal to negotiate with the Nepali side. Zhang Ming, he was an envoy, and he left rich records about his visit to Nepal. I will just show you the pictures here. He met with the Rana prime ministers and with the kings, and they just solved the problem. And they even bestow a prize from the national government to the Rana prime minister. Yeah, okay. Cultural performance with the British residents. The Trafalgar Square and the New Palace, Swayambhu, it's Buddha's. I think it's Buddha not. Nepali king, Nepali lady. It's very interesting. When Zhang Ming he returned from Nepal to India, then back to China, he made a very short stay in Singapore, and he was warmly welcomed by the Singapore-based Chinese communities there. So I always feel like, okay, we can maybe another futurist topic is about this kind of China, Nepal, and the Singapore triangle relations. Yes, and I think lots of histories can be discovered from that. So even for Zhang Ming, like a diplomatic envoy, he also used Nepal as a way to reflection on the modernity about China itself. He thinks Nepal is like a strong modern state, because Nepal had Western materials, Eastern moralities, and had equal international relations with all the international societies, which China, from his perspective, did not have. It was until 1940s that this book came out, A New Account of Nepal. It was written by a geologist, Zhang Xilin. So trained as a geologist, Zhang published many articles in Chinese that introduced the general conditions of Nepal and other Asian countries to Chinese public. Zhang was a member of the New Asia Academy, 新亚细亚学会, which advocated New Asianism, appealing to traditional Asian moralities and restore these Asian countries standing internationally and uphold justice in oppressed nations. Although Zhang was very sympathetic to European discourse on nationalism, development, and modernities, his work on Nepal asked his Chinese readers to understand Nepal from his own perspective and knowledge rather than from Europeans. And the first time in modern Chinese writings upon Nepal, this kind of local shared past and historical figures were written and introduced as a way to reimagine the Nepal-China relations in the history. From 1911 to 1920s, none of the articles, books I have read talked about this kind of Arnigo and the Princess Brigade. It was in Zhang's book the first time this kind of historical figures were mentioned. And very interestingly, Zhang, he later went to the Nanyang University in Singapore and as a professor of geography, and later Nanyang University was like moved to NUS. So you can say that NUS was also part of the modern Chinese knowledge production about Nepal. So yeah, now we went to the new era and Nepal and the PRC. So Nepal and the PRC established the official diplomatic relations in 1955. So this year is the 70th anniversary it's not that big and grandly celebrated, but lots of events were held, during the last month, I think. So in the new era and the knowledge production in China about Nepal, mainly trying to construct a history of long-standing friendship. Lots of knowledge productions have came into being in this era. And I will not go through one by one here. Today, I will mainly focus on Arnigo, one of the most famous historical figure. If you have to choose one, he's like the biggest symbol of Nepal-China relations. The highway between China and Nepal, constructed in 1916s, is named after him, the Arnigo Highway. So who's Arnigo? So basically, he's a ancient Nepal architect who worked in Yuan dynasty in China from 13th century to 14th century. And as far as I know, in modern Chinese writing about Nepal, he was firstly mentioned in the new account of Nepal I just mentioned earlier. This is the modern imagination of Arnigo. So Arnigo was most famously be known as the constructor and the designer of the White Pagoda Baita in Beijing in the Miaoying Temple. It's still there, it's very beautiful. The temple, the Baita is very beautiful. So as early as in 1961, Chinese historian Huang Shenzhang, he had already wrote about Arnigo in the Chinese newspaper People's Daily, the Min Ribao. And in 1972, Zhou Enlai, he issued a request to protect the White Baita Temple in Beijing and saving it from the Cultural Revolution destructions. And he even asked people to protect and to restore the temple. Why? Because earlier, when the Nepali king Mahendra, he visited Beijing, they want to visit the White Pagoda, but they could not even find the entry of the temple. It was completely destroyed and deserted during that time. So in the Nepali side, Satya Mohan Joshi, the most renowned Arnigo scholar in Nepal, is celebrated for his contribution to rerouting Arnigo to his alleged home country and taking back knowledge production about Arnigo from his Chinese counterparts. Arnigo, Satya Mohan Joshi was a member of Nepal's Buddhist delegation to Beijing in 1959. And at that time, some Chinese officers introduced Arnigo to him for the first time. Joshi played a very significant role in lifting Arnigo as a national Nepali hero. And in 1960, Joshi went to China as a political exile, teaching Nepali language in Beijing and with assistance for 5 years. And with assistance from his Chinese students and friends, he managed to collect very rich materials of Arnigo in Chinese. And in 1987, he published this book, the well-known Nepalese architect Arnigo, Glagar Arnigo, and in Nepali language. And Joshi's efforts to establish Arnigo as one of Nepal's Rashtriya Vibhuti sort of was intertwined with the state's Panchayat nationalism during that period, which aimed to construct and sustain a unified Nepali nation on the ideology basis of one monarchy, one language, and one religion. And part of the grand project aimed to construct a national history, Rashtriya Itihas, that could unite all people who had different culture and linguistic practice on a uniform Nepali identity. So that is the context why Arnigo can be made into this national hero of Nepal. So we can, and Joshi also wrote a epic of Arnigo. So we can see that Arnigo as a historical figure, actually it's very modern and invented for this kind of certain political agendas. And very interestingly, the historical evidence to support the existence of Arnigo is very thin. We only have one Chinese text, and people wrote for Arnigo for his death. And sorry, memorial, and that is the only single historical text we had about Arnigo. There's no evidence about Arnigo in Nepal. And now some scholars say Arnigo is from Patan and from the Little Bull, and they even say, okay, Arnigo is from the Shakya claim. Actually, if you look at the primary historical materials, there's no mention about that kind of things. So we can see, okay, how politicalized the figure of Arnigo. Yeah, it's me in the temple with Arnigo statues. And this is how the contemporary Chinese imagine Arnigo constructing the white pagoda. Now Arnigo is quite commercialized. The masks were Arnigo and linking Arnigo to this kind of Yuan and the Mongolian empire identities. And since then, the knowledge production in China about Nepal is very IR-based. Even now, it is very IR-based. And yes, and now we and for decades, since the middle of 20th century, the relationship between Nepal and China can be best described as what Galen Merton describes as the infrastructural relations. It's very limited and to infrastructure projects, delegations, and state-to-state interactions. And it was only until the most recent 15 years, the interactions and forms and the rules and the picking about China became more diverse and more vivid. Now we have this kind of state-to-state interactions. We also have this kind of grounded, more everyday and more private interactions between China and Nepal. Now China is like the second largest tourist source for Nepal, and it's problematic, but the Chinese presence, especially the tourism industry, changing Tamer, the traditional Western tourist-centered international tourist hub, into a new Chinatown, and we also have this kind of religions and the Tibetan Buddhist things. We also have this kind of commercial and personal investment. All these kind of forms are happening on the ground between Nepal and China. And although, of course, BRI is a very important thing between Nepal and China, as Merton he stressed, we should definitely look beyond the BRI. BRI is there, but it's not everything. It's an umbrella concept, but it's not all-compassing. And currently, we have more diverse forms and rules of knowledge production. We have film, we have online travelogues, we have vlogs upon Nepal and China. They demonstrate a internalized Orientalism and even racial discriminations for this kind of emergent middle-class Chinese urbanist Chinese people. And very interestingly, we have more unexpected rules of interactions between Nepal and China. Nowadays, many urban young Chinese people, they are coming to Nepal to learn English, to learn yoga, to learn golf, and to learn bakery and pastry, all this kind of stuff. And why? Because it's cheaper in Nepal, and with the 1/3 price compared to they have in China, they can have all these kind of more diverse options and the same quality. And we also have this kind of digital nomads of Chinese digital nomads in Nepal. So yes, I'm come to the conclusion. Yes. So what about Nepal and China now? And what's this kind of inspirations we can have from Nepal-China relations? I got an inspiration from this film. This film is called The Shadowless Tower. As you can see from the poster, the white pagoda is everywhere in the film, it's always in the settings. However, although this film is about white pagoda and it did not have a essentialized and exotic lens to look at Nepal. It's totally about urban life in Beijing and how people live in Beijing, they explore their everyday life. White pagoda is just there. And so I got inspiration from this film. I think it's a symbol of alternative way of thinking about China and Nepal relations. We have this kind of cultural intimacy between Nepal and China. And this kind of cultural intimacy should not be conceptualized as based on putting two isolated entities together, but in a more coherent and hybrid ways where the cultural boundaries are blurred in different affective moments. And these affective moments, I think, will not only offer us to research Nepal and China, but for larger picture in inter-Asia engagements, how we Asian actors, we look at our neighbors, we look at our own people. And yeah, these two are my favorite pictures. I want to summarize the relations upon Nepal-China. The left one is the Chongqing Mansion in Hong Kong. The Chongqing Mansion is a very infamous place. Drugs and all criminals and are reported there. However, it's also the place where the South Asian immigrants and this kind of workers they will have in Hong Kong. And so, and the next one is the Chinese people in Tamil, in Nepal. And actually, for me, if you just look at these pictures together, you can't really tell one from another. So actually, I have no answers to these kind of things and how we can actually conceptualize Nepal and China. I just want to see how, I think I just open a floor to a more debates about how we can, from Nepal and China relations, to reconceptualize this kind of trans-Asian intimacy and how this kind of trans-Asian intimacy and can help us to, as Asian scholars and as a communities, how we can better for our own agendas, right, and for our own interests. So I think that's how I will stop here. And thank you very much for your patience and listening.
Thank you, Shiju. That was very rich, very comprehensive, I would say, coming from history to the present. The history stuff was actually very rich, and I think this gives a very different perspective, unlike the usual kind of narratives that we hear about Nepal-China relations, which, as you also alluded to, mostly looked at from the international relations perspective. And whenever we talk of Nepal-China, India definitely comes into the picture in terms of the three-country relationships. But then you left us also with a question about how to, look at these relationships between neighbors. Maybe I'll just open the floor, but as my friends perhaps might be thinking about the questions. So one thing that I wanted to ask is, as you also said, like currently when we look at Nepal-China, India definitely comes in the picture because it's looked at from a broader international relations perspective. And there are allegations about whether Nepal is going towards India or towards China. That kind of stuff is there at the macro level. But at the people's level, because you do ethnographic studies, yes, you interact with people on the ground. So what do you see among the common people? How do you see the common people's perception towards the relationship between these two countries? Do they also look at it from this broader perspective of that, that the power relations in terms of the political parties' affinities, as it has been, that kind of a narrative has been there, or do they also look at it from the perspective of those cultural affinities, the historical relation that we have had, the two countries have had for quite long? If you could reflect just on that.
Yes. Should I see it now, or
maybe we can start with that and then?
Okay, sure. It's a very good question. Thank you. And actually, India, among the Chinese people in Nepal and among the Nepali communities, so of course in Nepal and with those Nepali people who will trying to interact with Chinese people, India always have a very negative images. It's like a common enemy for uniting Chinese people and the Nepali people. Like as long as you have a common enemy, you are united. I mean, I would say, but that's a very simple way to put forward the things, and I think the picture actually is much more complicated on that. If we just go back to Tamil, the new Chinatown there, and you will find Indian people, Nepali people, Pakistani, and Chinese. We are doing business together. And you go to a shop, you go to like a jewelry shop. You imagine the owner will be a Nepali people, right? But actually, he's an Indian, and he treats his Chinese customers very good. He will offer you milk tea, and he will go through every item with you very carefully, and there's no impatience. And the Chinese people, they will be very happy to negotiate with them. And I know, and even I know, and there are even rumors that okay, some female Chinese tourists, they will find the male owners very attractive. So you will see on the ground, if you are focusing on other agendas, this kind of national states oriented conflicts are sort of like dismissed, and the people have their own interests. And so I will say that so I will propose this kind of alternative angles, looking at alternative agendas between people is one way we can get rid of this kind of nationalist limits when we're trying to cooperate or we're trying to interact with our neighboring countries, Nepal, India, right? And speaking of India, I mean, currently in China, the reputation of and the narrative about India is very negative, and I think it's partially it's like the nationalist discourse, state-dominant nationalist discourse about India. And however, even I mean, the last 5 days, it's like the worst time. And I think between the relationship of China and India, no visa, no visits, no everything. Basically, the whole country is stopped from each other. However, even during this period, the Indian embassy, they will host this kind of cultural events. They will invite the yoga teachers, and they will invite this kind of tabla drum instructors to China, to Beijing, and they will have this kind of voluntary classes to the Chinese ordinary publics. Mm-hmm. And a friend of me, she worked in the Chinese embassy, Indian embassy in China, and I asked her, okay, are there really people who will attend these courses? She, of course, people are very fascinating about these courses. Every class is like fully registered. And people are so interested in this kind of culture things of India. There's a very large group of Chinese people, at least in Beijing, who will attend every session of this kind of courses. So you can see this kind of cultural intimacy between China and India, regardless of this kind of nationalist state discourses, are always there. And another example is that in China this year, we have like a animation of a blockbuster like哪吒. It's based on a traditional Chinese myth it's sort of hard to explain, but anyway, it's based on a traditional Chinese legend. However, and it's like a cultural phenomenon this year in China. But actually, if you look at but one side product of the film is people will analyze how the original home of this Chinese legendary figure actually is come from India. Mm-hmm. And the people will tell you how from the Buddhist and even from the Hindu world, this Chinese legendary character migrated to China. So you see, the modern state is a very modern thing in history, whole history of India and China. So, and I think beyond that, we have much more complicated and deeper relations in terms of culture and in terms of people and everything. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Let me open the floor. I think Sandeep has a question. We'll collect all the questions and then
Thank you. This was very illuminating, and I learned a lot from this presentation. I have two questions.
Yes.
One builds on Pushpa's question, and At the risk of sounding a little culturally hegemonistic, I don't intend to. Just from a historical perspective, thinking about how much historically in Chinese imagination of Nepal, I was struck by the fact that how much your presentation did not mention India. And historically, I am curious, were there moments when it was impossible to imagine Nepal without mediating influence of India? Or was it always the conception of a geographical separate entity from India that existed in China? I was thinking about, I mean, historically, I wonder to what degree was there a differentiation made in ancient times between India and Nepal in Chinese imagination. And then during the British period, for example, you briefly mentioned this thing which I had no idea about this. There was some border dispute between Nepal and China, and there was almost a war as you characterized it. And I wonder that in 1930s when that is happening, how is it possible to have something like that without British India getting involved, right? Or imagining British India in some way, because Nepal is a protectorate of British India. Similarly, after decolonization till 1960s, I wonder to what degree does CCP view Nepal as, before the 1962 war, if views it as an independent state or views it as something which is to a certain degree extension of India, right? So I'm saying in that imagination, when does Nepal emerge? Or I imagine this is not a linear process, it changes from time to time, but when does it seem as a concrete separate entity, and when does it seem as in some way amorphous blob of India in general, right? And what changes that kind of delineation, right, between the two?
Yes.
The other question I have is about the...
Oh, so that's a one question.
It was a very rich presentation.
Yeah.
What can I do?
No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Thank you.
And the other question, I'll be very brief, which is the opening claim that you had. It was very interesting the way you framed it, which was that to think about this, and I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me, give me some rope, is to imagine the smaller geographical conception as a way to balance against these large spatial ideas that exist now. And it was a way interesting that you did not articulate it as that contributing into that larger spatial thing, but as a way of balancing it. You see some sort of tension between the two. What kind of tension do you think is between the two conceptions?
Yes. Then we'll go to.
Okay.
Do you have a question?
I do have several questions, but I mean, I want to pile all of
Most
them.
important one.
Yes. That's a tough one. But okay, I'm sorry, but I'll bring international relations into the whole thing. That's what I do professionally. By the way, it was a fascinating presentation. I really hope that you turn this stuff into a book at some point. It's really book worthy, and I think a lot of people would appreciate it. So my question is, see, Buddhism is obviously a very important prism through which China looks at Nepal. And in the last 5 years, I saw something very interesting in Chinese media and knowledge production. That is, there was a debate whether Buddha is Indian or Nepalese. And of course, I mean, we all understand how absurd in some ways this debate is, but there was an attempt to frame Buddhism as a much more of a Nepali phenomena and much less as an Indian one, I think for political purposes as a result of the recent tensions. So how do you think politics affects this knowledge production and its absorption by the general Chinese public? Because I think that the general Chinese public in general tends to use primarily Chinese sources for its information. Therefore, such an attempt to frame things is probably highly effective. So how far it has gone and how effective is it? Thank you.
Yes. We had started a little late. Perhaps Imran has the last question maybe, and then with your response, I think then we'll conclude.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor. That was there were so many threads and there was so much time and space and all kinds of things happening. I don't know if I have a question. I think there's a question forming within. But I quite enjoyed the slides. One of the slides that said, you know, Nepal is poison. You know, lots of monks go there and they die and all these kinds of stuff. And I think what I'm trying to say kind of harnesses off what Ivan was saying. Looks at sort of there is the Buddhist connection, at least in the pre-modern setting. Does that provide, even though, you know, you've titled your talk as Familiar as Strangers, I wonder if the religious aspect, particularly Buddhism, allows some kind of connection between both China and Nepal in the pre-modern context. And I wonder if it can act as sort of, if Nepal can act as some kind of bridge, at least in the present context, that sort of somehow provides some kind of medium for China-India relations as well. That was it, I think. Was there a question? I hope there's something useful there.
Yes, I got it. Thank you, thank you. Actually, yeah, actually, I was very surprised why India is always there. Why Nepal had to be? Of course, it's a bridge. I will say in many aspects it's a bridge. But why, when we do something about China and Nepal, India has to be involved? I mean, I think, yeah, it's all, this question is always very curious for me. When you do something about China, Japan studies, where do you have to involve like South Korea or North Korea? So I think when we think about this way, Nepal's own subjectivity sort of is like marginalized in the discourse. We will think, okay, Nepal is not important. Its role in bridging or facilitating or stopping or whatever ways mediating China-India, that line, that's the place where the importance is lies. So yeah, that just in some kind of thinking on these things. Yeah, back to the question. Yeah, all the questions are very important. Actually, the first question is about is there in the history a moment that Nepal is isolated, isolatedly understand from India, right? And yeah, so actually, that we to answer this question, we need to understand that how India, as all the South Asian subcontinent, now is understood by Chinese in history. In China, for a quite long time in history, India, the South Asian continent, the land is called the 5 Indias. But it's not very accurate. The most accurate way is 5 dimensions of India. So the whole continent is called India. So if you say, is there a moment that Nepal can be isolated from India? No, there's no such a moment. It's because it's just located in 5 Indias. So, and it is located in the north dimension of one of 5 Indias. So that's it. And the 1930 war, the British actually is not very much behind the thing, I think, but the Chinese people, they will say, and the Chinese discourse, public discourse during that time, they will say it was the British colonists and the imperialists. They did the mastermind behind the invasions, and they don't think Nepal alone will have the bold to do the thing. So, but actually, the British it's not there, and actually, it's pretty much like the conflicts between Nepal and the Tibet, over the Tibet-based Nepali people's legal things, because legal things. So the British were not much there, and very interesting. Actually, after Zhang Ming, the Chinese envoys, after he returned from China, he wrote a report in English. He specifically mentioned that Nepal is not a vassal of China; it's an independent state. However, this report is very unpopular? What is more popular? More popular is Sun Zhongshan, the Sun Yishan, the founding father of the Republic of China. During 1924, he went to Japan and he gave a speech in Japan addressing this kind of Pan-Asianism. And he clearly mentioned Nepal and Bhutan are vassal states in China. And now they still have a very good relation with China because China has this kind of Eastern moralities. And they were attracted to China by these Eastern moralities. And Mao Zedong, he also mentioned Nepal in one of his writings that Nepal was like one of the Chinese ethnic groups should be treated as. So I think the concept of Nepal's state China, it's very transforming, and it's totally two different people. And I think only up to middle 20th century, they have a more unified and more state-sanctioned concept of what is Nepal and where is Nepal and our relationship with Nepal. And before that, it's very transforming and very diverse. And sorry, oh yes, and about your and my theoretical argument. Personally, I'm thinking from the BRI thing, because we all know BRI is not a, like many scholars say that BRI is not just a contemporary project. It has more far-reaching implication as a new way of geography of world making. It conceptualizes new ways of the geographical units, right, from the perspective of geographic perspective. I agree with that. I wonder if one day GRI has become a conventional and kernelized concept to understand geographies like Asia, like Global South. Where is Nepal's position in that kind of places? And where are all the so-called small countries' positions, their subjectivities in the BRI histories? So one of the aims of my work is trying to not preserve, not restore, but trying to maintain the tensions between this kind of different concepts of BRI, because BRI is very big. It's cross-continental, and the countries and actors like Nepal, they have very little places in there. And I think this kind of little spaces also matters, and we should pay attention to this kind of little places. So that's, I think, the contribution of my theoretical argument. And yes, the Buddhist thing, yes. As long as the Chinese tourism in Nepal, it's very prominent now. The southern part that lie in the southern plains is the place where the Chinese tourist presence is least observed. Why? Because they think that is the area of influence of India. And the Chinese and when back earlier days, when the two states relations are good, the many Chinese travelers, they try to cross the borders between Nepal and India to find excitement without a visa, and now they won't do that. Having said that, Lumbini, the Buddhist secret place, now is one of the most popular tourist place between Nepal and China. And it has like one of the most prominent Chinese tourist places in the southern part. Why? Because they have this kind of temples and all this kind of agencies and economic ties there, and they have the very mature and complex Chinese tourism infrastructure there, which will facilitate the Chinese tourists there. I'm trying to say that is the Buddhists, they do have a way to how to say, to be materialized on the ground, and not only on the discourse. And I think last year, as a very big project organized by the Chinese embassy in Nepal, was like a dragon boat, the Longzhou Dragon Boat Festival in Lumbini, and they have a marathon there. So this kind of Buddhist types, although may not directly under the title of Buddhism, still plays a very significant role between Nepal and China. And of course, the state discourse have a very, very huge role in that. And I think the state roles has significantly influenced the Chinese perceptions about Nepal as a Buddhist country, right? And actually, Nepal has never been a Buddhist country, but in all the many popular discourse in China, Nepal is a Buddhist country. And I think the Chinese government's overemphasize on the Buddhist aspects of Nepal and on this kind of Buddhist links between Nepal and China is one reason behind that. And how Buddhism, it's also related to your question, how Buddhism can bridge Nepal and China, India. So in the pre-modern time.
Yeah.
What did it sort of make it less strange because of those familiar kind of cultural religious aspects? Yeah.
So you mean what about the general situations of the Buddhist connections between Nepal and China during
Between China and Nepal.
China and Nepal? Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of Chinese monks, they visit Nepal and they visit India. They stayed a long time there. And there are also Nepali Buddhist monks, they visit China. They translate Buddhist sutras in China and all these kind of links. And Milarepa, like one of the most famous Tibetan Buddhist guru, he went to Nepal, and he went to India by Nepal and to learn so the things. And when the Muslims, Islam has sort of like reduced the presence, Buddhist presence in India, many Indian monks they went to Kathmandu because Kathmandu in between, and it's like the sort of like the last paradise of Buddhism in the world. And now after 1959, the Tibetan refugees and the monks they of course they went to Kathmandu and live in Nepal. And so this kind of Buddhist links, I think Nepal is like in between of China and India. This Buddhist links, it's like it's always there, and there's so many things about this kind of links, and it still is very strong now. Yes. Yeah, thank you.
Doesn't you have a question? I think we have run out of time, but maybe quick one.
Sorry.
Who is the reception and networking?
Yeah.
No. But yeah, maybe if you have a quick one, and yeah.
Okay, sorry, I thought it was till 4:30.
Yeah.
I think we have met before in Nepal. We were on the same panel. Is that the one with Jacob Rink and?
Yes.
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 Sorry. Sorry, I forgot about that. Sorry.
No worries. And so my question kind of follows up on that.
Yeah.
Kind of thinking very briefly, if you could kind of articulate what the association development aspiration within China when it comes to thinking about Nepal, because I'm also assuming because of this familiarity, what is the kind of development that is associated with Nepal? Is it kind of like a rural, idyllic place of that is associated with China, or is it more of this urban modernization, that trope of development? I'm asking this in relation to say when in China's popular association of Sri Lanka, usually the idea is of these large-scale mega projects, right, of ports. But that's not true. China has moved beyond that, and we see how it is engaging in these small-scale community projects, how it is very intelligently kind of playing a role within our Tamil nationalist politics in trying to counter India, for example. So I was kind of curious to understand how China, or at least at the policymaking levels, perceives of Nepal in development terms, whether it's, a more rural, idyllic kind of space. Yeah, thanks.
Do we have another question as well over there? Okay, maybe this is the last one then. Yeah, okay, end with this.
Well, from the perspective, development perspective, and how China sees Nepal, and well, I'm not very familiar with the state development policy towards Nepal. I'm not very familiar with that, but I can give you many stories about how the Chinese people and even the practitioners of development industries in Nepal, how they look at Nepal. There's a Chinese NGO and in Nepal and trying to can I give out the name here? Is it sort of like good or not?
Maybe could.
Okay, so
Without the name.
it's a very big
Sure.
Chinese NGO in Nepal, and it aims to development and lots of projects and from giving school bags to children in rural Nepal in primary schools, to tea garden cooperation in Ilam in eastern Nepal, and from water supply and renovation in Kathmandu. All these kind of projects, they are involved, and they have done many projects over the years. I will say that. But one time I got involved in one of the projects, and we were on a jeep from Kathmandu, from Patan to another places outside Kathmandu, and it's a school in the mountains. And our purpose was to distribute all this kind of school bags to students in that school, and the bag, all these kind of school bags, they were sponsored by the Chinese company Alibaba, and so a private Chinese company, and we arrived one day earlier, and over the night we stayed at local people's home, and it's very good. And on the next day in the morning, and the official event started, the director, she was very impatient all the time. She gave out the bags to the school, to the boys and to the girls. But she was very impatient. She was even angry about those kids. And she said, "You are so lazy. Just took the bag, and let's finish everything together." That is her attitude. And so I think this story tells two aspects about how Chinese see development in Nepal. China is an aid in that, and they are doing lots of things, I will say. But actually, if you are interacting with them in person and on intimate relations, only in very intimate basis, that's the attitude they will give you. And I was in Nepal living with a Chinese company, a SOE, Chinese SOE, who were responsible for constructing roads and buildings in Nepal. I lived with them during my field work for half a year. And every day they just complain to me about how chaotic their work is, working with the Nepali people. So that's the attitude they will have towards the development thing in Nepal. They will complain, okay, oh, if you want to build a road in Nepal, you go across a village, the land, if you want to take land, it will take like 10 years for the whole process to be completed. how can we make money from that? You see, so this kind of different concepts about what should be development, what they are for development are very different from the Chinese and from the in the minds of the Chinese engineers. And of course, we know that the China and the Nepal, we are going to construct a Trans-Himalayan railway, like the Central Rail project, like the most important project. And when I was leaving the compound, I think a group of Chinese experts, they just visit Nepal and for 1 week, and I think they are one part of the group to do some this kind of re-examinations about how actually we can contribute the railways in mountains, right, on the Nepali side. Well, they just complained, the Nepali government, they don't want to pay any money. They just want to China give them the railways. That's impossible. And so that is how they conceive, the future of the railways. So I see, from the policy level, from state level, there are many things promising, sounds very promising, and even many can be implemented on the ground slowly, but still implemented. But still, you can't change people's attitudes. Yes, but well, I see. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Jishu. I think we have run out of time already, but that was a very fascinating presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. And thank you everyone for participating, for the questions. Hopefully we will meet again in the next seminar. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.